Hello and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we are so glad to have you here for a special edition of this show. We are on location at the Donald M. Payne Senior School of Technology in Newark, where the Democratic candidates for governor took to the stage for their final debate before the June 10th primary election. It was a 2.5-hour debate, giving candidates an opportunity to dive really deep into three issues: affordability and taxes, education, and transportation and development. There were 5 candidates who participated. Steve Sweeney is the former state Senate president and a union iron worker from West Deptford. He's the only South Jersey candidate. Sweeney's banking on his 20 years of legislative experience to win the June 10th primary. He's pushing for affordability, proposing a $400 relief check for middle-class families, and a plan to build 200,000 affordable housing units in 5 years. Sweeney calls himself a builder, not a talker, emphasizing real solutions over rhetoric. Polls show him trailing, but with a crowded Democratic field. He's betting that South Jersey will support him and carry him to victory. Ras Baraka is well known as a progressive firebrand. Baraka has been the mayor of Newark since 2014. He touts slashing crime to a 60-year low and replacing 23,000 lead pipes. His agenda includes universal basic income, reparations, and affordable housing. Recently arrested protesting an ICE facility, Baraka's gained national attention, boosting his profile in a crowded June 10th primary. Critics call him too liberal, but supporters see a visionary fighter fighting for equality. Congressman Josh Gottheimer has been representing New Jersey's 5th congressional district since 2017. The 50-year-old Wyckoff resident and former Clinton speechwriter is pitching himself as the lower taxes, lower cost candidate. Gottheimer's campaign focuses on cutting property and income taxes, boosting jobs, and fighting hate while protecting Jersey values. He is a moderate and co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. Congresswoman Micah Sherrill, a Naval Academy graduate and former Navy helicopter pilot. Sherrill, who is from Montclair, served nearly a decade before becoming a federal prosecutor. Elected to Congress in 2018, she's focused on affordability, reproductive rights, and infrastructure. Her campaign aims to lower taxes, build housing, and protect freedoms against national threats. As the only woman in a crowded Democratic primary on June 10th, Sherrill's polling is strong with broad support. Jersey City Mayor Steve Fulop is a Marine veteran who served in Iraq. Fulop's led Jersey City since 2013, achieving 0 traffic deaths in a year and pushing progressive policies like paid sick leave. His campaign focuses on transit reform, affordable housing, and fighting political corruption. Fulop's named South Orange Mayor Sheena Cullum as his lieutenant governor pick, a first for a primary candidate. Polls show him neck and neck in a tight June 10th race. Finally, Sean Spiller, who was not on the debate stage because he did not meet the fundraising threshold set by ELEC. Spiller is a high school science teacher and president of the New Jersey Education Association, a former Montclair mayor and son of Jamaican and New Zealand immigrants. Spiller's campaign focuses on affordability, education, and workers' rights. Backed by a $35 million NJEA-linked PAC, he's pushing for rent control and pension security. Now, I had the honor of moderating the debate. I was joined by an impressive panel. 2 of those members of the panel are here with me today. We have Micah Rasmussen. He is the director of the Rebovich Institute for New Jersey Politics at Rider University. And we have Joey Fox, congressional correspondent for the New Jersey Globe. Gentlemen, it's great to see you here.
Good to be here.
Laura.
Right? And so this debate, it was a 2.5-hour debate. By the way, we're talking about the Democrats. Later on in another show, we'll be talking about the Republicans. But this was a 2.5-hour debate. And Joey, I'll go to you first. Can you talk a little bit about when you were, and it was 2.5 hours with only 3 topics. Can you talk about how these questions were formed and who the target audience was?
I mean, so the design of this debate, you know, the Globe and us with On New Jersey did one prior set of debates. New Jersey Spotlight News, NJPBS did another set of debates that were more typical in terms of the structure, where it was a bit shorter and it went through a lot of different topics, and the idea was to cover as much ground as possible. And I think that the idea behind these debates, they're the final debates leading up to the June 10th primary, behind this Democratic debate was to really dive deep into the issues that polling shows and that conversations with, everyday voters show people really, really care about. So that's transit, that's affordability, that's education. And those categories obviously cover a lot of different topics. But the idea being that those are the kinds of things that people just going through their everyday lives, and specifically undecided voters, people who are looking at this race and have not yet made up their mind. They are not specifically kind of in the tank for any particular candidate. That they go through their days really thinking about. And that was the design of this whole model of 2.5 hours, 3 topics, get really specific answers, don't let the candidates get away with the kind of generalities that you might be able to get away with in a shorter format, and give people a lot of information as they try to make up their minds.
Yeah. Now, Micah, one of the topics you focused in on was education. And I want to get your thoughts on that segment. Seemed to be one of the longer segments. It felt like, the candidates were very spirited and very passionate about a lot. But, when it came to education, do you feel like that you were able to, were you successful in being able to nail the candidates down on specific plans, answering specific questions, instead of just, the sound bites that we were trying to get around from the other debates?
I think that education is an issue, maybe more than any other, that everybody has thought about, right? We all have kids in school. As a policy issue, Democrats are very concerned about it. We spend a lot of money in New Jersey on education. And so this is not an area that people are unfamiliar with, candidates are unfamiliar with. It's something they put a lot of thought into. And yeah, I think we did get them off of just the talking points to the extent that we asked them about things that were off of the talking points. There were only 1 or 2 instances, I think, throughout the debate where we really had to press them and say, you didn't answer that question, let's try again. We did, and when we did that, the candidates came back and answered it. So I felt good about the amount of information we were able to get out on these issues, spending 40 minutes on education. And by the way, that's something voters can go back and look at. They don't have to watch the whole 2.5 hours. They can just, if they're thinking about education, watch that 40 minutes, and you're going to get a lot of information about where these 5 candidates stand.
Yeah, so David Wildstein was focusing on the affordability. He took the lead on affordability. Joey, you took the lead on transit. Micah on education. It was interesting because we had breaking news during the debate because the transit strike was solved during our debates. You were able to break that news.
Yeah, I mean, so that was, the debate started at 7 p.m. Transit was our first section that we covered, and the governor held a press conference at 7:45 announcing that the transit strike was over. We, and lots of journalists and everything, knew about an hour beforehand that in fact the strike was over, that in fact service would resume. So that definitely prompted some scrambling on our end to make sure that our questions were matching the actual reality. But it just kind of showed how relevant these transit issues are sort of day to day. And I think during that transit section, we also had a segment on Newark Airport. And that got into something that I noticed as kind of a repeating theme in many segments of the debate, which is this is obviously a state level office. A lot of what people are thinking about right now are federal level issues. It's the Newark Airport is not something that's governed by state laws. It's something that's governed by the FAA. It's all above sort of your average governor's pay grade. And that's same true for people who are concerned about, let's say, tariffs and their impact on affordability. It's true for people who care a lot about Medicaid or about education funding that's coming from the federal government. And so that was, I thought, not necessarily a point of difference, because the Democrats all could agree, they're going to say we don't like Trump. They're going to say we don't like the moves that he's making. They're going to say, we're concerned about what's happening at Newark Airport. But because you had 2 members of Congress on that stage, they said, I've been in Washington fighting these fights. And then their 3 opponents would say, well, why the hell haven't you been winning them? And I thought that was a really interesting dynamic to see play out among the 5 candidates, and I'd be curious to see whether voters are thinking about it in the same way. Are they, in fact, holding, Josh Gottheimer, Micah Sherrill, anyone else who's in Washington right now, accountable for some of these issues, and what can they reasonably expect anyone who's running for governor to do about them?
And do you feel that you got some solid answers on that? Did you get the definitive answers that you were hoping to get?
I think that we got... Well, to some extent, I don't think that there are solid answers on some of these questions when you're asking gubernatorial candidates, right? And they will tell you that. I think Steve Sweeney said that, basically exactly that, on the FAA and the Newark Airport question, being like, this is not a state-level issue. This is something that we can kind of use our bully pulpit on, and we can sort of, advise our residents on. But ultimately, if there are going to be solutions to this problem, it has to be coming from higher above. It cannot be coming from us. And so, oh yeah, Micah, go ahead.
No, I really liked your section because you had... you had Sweeney, who was advocating for building things, right? He's a builder, right? That's what he does, right? You had Baraka, when it came to the Newark answers or the airport answers, he's the mayor who's really paying a lot of attention and concerned about the safety of people flying in and out of Newark. Not that we all aren't. You had Gottheimer who was saying, wait a minute, this is an economic issue. So I really love
You had Steve Fulop, who one of his main topics as mayor has been sort of urban development and making Jersey City more of sort of like a real urban core and developing things in sort of a YIMBY-ish way. So that was, it all applied to what he, and Mikey Sherrill, she was once called in sort of a throwaway tweet, the tunnel-obsessed congresswoman, and she took that label and ran with it. So to this day, she is the tunnel-obsessed congresswoman because she wants these transit connections to be fixed. She wants all these things to work better. So they all have this background in the issue.
And voters don't often in New Jersey get this level of options, right? So I really have enjoyed watching the interplay between them and getting all these ideas on the table and talking about them.
So we have some sound bites that we're going to pull so our viewers can hear directly from the candidates. The first one we're going to play is from Steve Fulop. So we have that ready to go. Let's hear Steve Fulop. He's talking about the general election and taking on the political establishment.
And I'm going to tell you what the Republican nominee is going to say every day is that this person, the Democrat, is 4 more years of Phil Murphy. You like your energy bill? 4 more years of Phil Murphy. You like your taxes? 4 more years of Phil Murphy. And we haven't elected a Democrat in more than 50 years. And if you are an establishment candidate, if you are a creature of the Democratic establishment here in New Jersey, if you have the same consultants and the same lobbyists and the same message, you are dead on arrival in November.
All right, so let me get your reaction to what Steve Fulop had to say. Micah, what did you have to think about his performance overall and generally his message right here?
Yeah, I thought that he was really right to be talking about strategy. I think he has what he thinks is a winning strategy, and I think he has something to say to voters about whether or not it's going to work. And he thinks that the tried and true is not going to work. And so I think it was right for him to talk about it, but I think it was very smart. He's doing a service to the party and saying, think about these things. Think about this now, before it's too late. You're going to pick a nominee. Think about who's going to be able to beat Jack Ciattarelli, because this is going to be tough. Right. So I thought it was a very it hit home.
And I think that he and Mayor Baraka feel sort of more of a need to make that particular argument than maybe the other 3 candidates, especially Mikey Sherrill, Josh Gottheimer. Sherrill and Gottheimer represent, or used to represent, their districts have become bluer, but they flipped Republican districts. They are kind of associated with the idea of beating Republicans and holding tough seats. And, you know, for Democrats who care a lot about electability and who are very nervous about electing a Republican in November, that's sort of built into their pitch. And so you've seen Fulop by making the argument that, you know, we need something new, we need something that's not the same old. And then Baraka, he didn't really bring this up in the debate, but he said in the past, you know, we need a candidate who will excite the urban base, the black voter base, the progressive base, someone who won't just sort of kowtow to whatever Republicans are saying and hope that the moderate swing voters will save the day. So you see them making these arguments that they kind of have to make, I think, because they know that for a lot of voters who may not be super tuned into the race, but just know broad things about the candidates, they'll probably associate the swing district congresspeople more with electability than they will with the mayors of the 2 biggest, very blue cities.
Now, one of the things I also thought was notable when we were watching this debate play out and as we prepare to cover and host debates is looking to other past debates. You know, the first time we held a debate, everybody was very polite. They were very kind to each other. PBS held a debate the week before where you saw Steve Fulop and Mikey Sherrill. They were really going at it. We didn't see those fireworks this time. Micah, did that surprise you?
Well, they were at their own podiums, right? So interpersonally or from a body language perspective, they had their own space.
There was no tapping.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly.
Well, that was
Ras Baraka and Josh Gottheimer.
And Josh Gottheimer last time, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But we kept. I mean, you know, this is absolutely not a reflection on the last debate, but we had a lot to get to, and we got to a lot. So there was a lot of substance in this debate, and I think we kept them on task.
Yeah.
We also had questions that I think, to a certain extent, you know, if they got into kind of back and forth, it was usually a relatively detailed policy back and forth. It wasn't the kind of thing that would have their emotions running really high.
Yeah, we didn't see a lot of attacks.
Yeah, and so, like, you know, sometimes debates get pretty intense, even when you're just talking about, you know, the marginal tax rate or whatever. But for the most part, I felt like the way that we structured this debate, and this has both pros and cons, I think, it meant that the candidates were much more focused on trying to push their own message than they were on sort of trying to tear down the others' similarly wonky answers.
All right.
I think, Laura, I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think they also have respect for each other. They definitely all think that they're the best ones to win. I'm not saying that, but they believe in, this is a strong field. And so they all have a certain level of respect for each other.
All right. We are going to go up to another soundbite from the debate. Josh Gottheimer answering a question from David Wildstein about making cuts. So let's go to that, and we'll get your thoughts on that before going to our next commercial break.
Give me something significant that if there had to be draconian cuts in the state budget, what would you cut?
I'm not accepting the premise of your question that there's going to be draconian cuts. The point is, a governor, as I'm going to be, is going to fight back against it each step of the way so we can have what we have, which is great for people, but actually just run things smarter and better here in Jersey without messing with our programs.
All right, let me get your responses to Josh Gottheimer really quick on this one before we go to commercial break. Joey.
I mean, I do think, if I remember correctly, no candidate, and both Josh Gottheimer and anyone else who sort of touched on this question, fully took the bait on it in terms of no one named a specific program that, you know, pays out money that they would cut. Ras Baraka talked about raising taxes to kind of account for it, but that's a little bit different from what David was asking. I mean, I do think it's notable that, as I was talking before about how the federal government is kind of leaning over this whole race and casting a shadow over it. All these candidates understand that if they get into office, they could be hit with a major fiscal crunch depending on what congressional Republicans and depending on what Donald Trump chooses to do. If there's major Medicaid cuts, if there are major federal funding cuts of any sort, that's just rough for New Jersey's budget. But so they're clearly thinking about it. They have to be thinking about it. If they're not thinking about it, then they're fools. But it's not necessarily the kind of thing that they want to come into a debate and say, oh yeah, you know, I actually hate that affordable housing program. I'll get rid of that, and that'll save $100 million.
Yeah. So, Micah, what did you think of Josh Gottheimer kind of pushing back, saying, I reject the premise of the question?
Yeah, it's what a politician does. I'm sorry to say. You know, we'll talk about the need to cut, but we won't say where to cut until after the votes, until after the election. That's typical. But I will say that I think it's incumbent on us to push, because you have in Washington this whole doge going on. You have this whole same idea of cutting, and they didn't wind up cutting very much, $150 billion out of a $7 trillion budget. So I think we've got to get more answers on where the cuts are going to come.
All right, we are going to have to cut away on the topic of cuts to a break, but we want you to stay with us as we continue our conversation on the primary debate and hearing from more candidates on the Democratic side. Stay with us.
Food brings people together. On Cooking with Copel, we combine culinary creativity with good conversation. This spring, we've invited all the candidates for governor to come into the Montclair kitchen, teach me to cook their favorite dish, and give the people of New Jersey a chance to get to know the individuals who would lead our state. It's going to be a fun and exciting way to get really involved in the democratic process. Can't wait to see you there.
Welcome back to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones, and we're talking about the final primary debate for Democratic candidates for governor ahead of the June 10th primary. My guests right now are Micah Rasmussen of the Rebovich Institute for New Jersey Politics at Rider University and Joey Fox of the New Jersey Globe. I'm going to jump right in because we have three more candidates we want to hear from. Mikey Sherrill is the first one we're going to hear from, and let's listen to that. I'm going to get your reactions from this past week's Democratic gubernatorial primary debate.
We know Jack Ciattarelli has promised to doge New Jersey. Trump has said he's 100% MAGA. He said he's going to not stand up to Trump on anything and go along with everything. And we also know that he said he's going to cut funding for Planned Parenthood and put in place an abortion ban. That's why we need a different kind of leader.
Micah, let me go to you first. A lot of polls are showing Mikey as the leader, and she in this soundbite is kind of already looking like she's pivoting to the general election. What were your thoughts on her performance?
It's very deliberate. She wants people to start thinking about her as the general election candidate. She talked about Ciattarelli more than anybody else on the stage. She wants to position herself in that way, and she wants to portray her a little bit inevitable, right? I'm ahead in the polls. This is going to happen, and so I think you know That's why we saw that strategy. The thing about it is that this is still a tight race. She is ahead, but anybody can still win this race with a big turnout on primary election day because the vote's going to be so small.
Right, and we still have 25% of the voters who are undecided, and this is Jersey. We want to go to our next soundbite, which is from Newark Mayor Rasmussen responding to a transportation question.
The economy is important, but safety is first, right? The fact that they're delaying and canceling flights is because it's unsafe in the airspace. We have to slow these planes down. We have to put space between them. And I agree, we need to push people to hire air traffic controllers immediately, fix radar systems and the infrastructure immediately so we can have a long-term fix. But people are traveling out of Newark tonight.
So, Joey, let me go to you on that. Rasmussen also really commanded the stage with his style of speaking and the way he not just answers the question, but how he delivers the question as well. Even in closing statements, Steve Sweeney said, I wish I didn't have to follow him. So let me just get your thoughts, on more his policy and the way he was answering his questions as well.
Yeah, I mean, he is a compelling guy. He is someone who, whether you're watching him on TV, whether you're sitting where we sit, engaging with him as moderators, he is someone who can he can tell a story. He can guide you along. He can convince you of things, even if, it's not a viewpoint that you might have originally agreed with. And I do think it's notable, in relation to the specific answer about Newark Airport, and he had a few other answers like this throughout the night. He's got a lot of hometown pride. This is something where Newark is a city that has had sort of a mixed reputation over the years in New Jersey, and he has worked really hard during his 10 years as mayor to make it someplace where, people want to be, where businesses want to be, where that sort of lives up to being the largest city in one of the wealthiest and most diverse states in the country. And these debates have been held in Newark, and he wanted to sort of defend that. He wanted to defend his city.
Right. We have one more soundbite we want to play for you. This is former Senate President Steve Sweeney, and he is answering a question on energy.
The electric costs in this state, it's 43% of our energy, so policy matters. And no one up here on the stage might say it, but I'm going to say it. We still need gas. We can't afford all this clean energy. We need more power. And guess what? Once we get more power generated, New Jersey used to export energy to other states. We were the envy. We generated more than we needed, and then we sent it and sold it. We're now relying on the PJM. We need to be self-sufficient. We need to create jobs here in New Jersey so that we can actually put people back to work.
So, Micah, Steve Sweeney, former Senate president, he's somebody who obviously knows the legislature. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have the experience that the mayors have as that, as a mayor. But what were your impressions of his performance and how he was answering questions in this debate?
I think Sweeney really enjoyed himself. He was right smack in the middle of the stage, right? And he was the guy who had the answers. New Jersey has done this already. We've tackled this. As the Senate president, look all that we did, right? And he actually put out a commercial right away that said more often than not, his opponents on the stage were agreeing with him. And they were, again and again. But the interesting thing about the clip that you showed, Laura, is that he also did a lot of clean energy in the legislature. So to say that we can't afford it is interesting since he was a proponent of it. I realize what he's saying here is we need more nuclear. He's from a part of the state where we've had a lot of nuclear power. We've generated a lot of nuclear energy.
Yeah. Joey, a lot of candidates were expressing a little concern about a 2.5-hour debate. And and at one point, we probably could have added more time to it because we're thinking, well, gosh, we haven't gotten to all of our questions. So let me get your thoughts just on the overall format. Do you feel that we were able to accomplish the goal and really deliver information to the voters that they aren't finding anyplace else? Or was there any news that you think was broken or things that they haven't really been able to tap into before in other formats?
I do think that we got to a lot. I also think that you're right that, it did feel at the end like it felt like we had as much that we still could have said as we would have if we had only done an hour-long debate, because this is such a crowded race and these are such opinionated people. And even when sometimes you would ask a question and all 5 of them would approximately agree, we sort of know intrinsically these are 5 people who would lead the state very different ways. You know, you've got people more on the moderate side like Steve Sweeney and Josh Gottheimer. You've got people more on the progressive side like Ras Baraka, Steve Fulop. And then even within those, there are some sort of gradations about levels of experience, the ways that they're treating, you know, endorsements and sort of the party establishment. So there are a ton of different fault lines that you can't always predict exactly how they're going to break down, and that the only way to really get a super clear idea of where they all stand is by just directly asking them. I think that this debate hopefully went a long ways towards clarifying that. There's actually, I'll plug this even though it's not my own news outlet, there was a Politico story that I thought was really clever called the Murphy Meter that tracks where every candidate on both sides of the aisle is relative to what Phil Murphy's current position is. So you can kind of see how the state might change under them. And I hope that other news outlets will continue to do, you know, either live interviews or other kinds of tools that will help voters figure out, okay, let's see, we've got to make this choice. How do we make it? Who fits best with what I'm looking for?
Micah, final 30 seconds here. As somebody who's worked for Governor Jim McGreevey many years ago and been in communications, and now what with the Democrats? These 5 candidates heading into the home stretch. What do you think that we can be looking for and should be looking for?
Oh boy, they at some point now they're going to have to turn to turnout, right? And some of them have already been doing that. Sweeney, a big South Jersey voting by mail program, and they have you know, a lot of votes already in. Middlesex County, a lot of them already in. But they're all going to be turning their attention to driving out their vote now.
Okay, well, Joey, Micah, thank you so much. It is about all get out the vote. We thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, and we thank you so much for watching New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones, and we look forward to seeing you back here next time.
Food brings people together. On Cooking with Copel, we combine culinary creativity with good conversation. This spring, we've invited all the candidates for governor to come into the Montclair kitchen, teach me to cook their favorite dish, and give the people of New Jersey a chance to get to know the individuals who would lead our state. It's going to be a fun and exciting way to get really involved in the democratic process. Can't wait to see you there.